Hola, amiga. Welcome to the Latina Leadership Podcast, a podcast by Latinas for all women. Get ready because today's conversation is really special. Hola, amigas. Welcome to a very special episode of the Latina Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Diaz, and today we're taking a moment to celebrate and reflect on what has truly been one of the most impactful seasons yet, Season 10. Season 10 was more than just a milestone. It was a movement, a reminder that Latinas are leading in every space, the courtroom, the boardroom, classrooms, our homes, and our own healing journeys. Each episode this season peeled back a new layer of what it means to lead with purpose, to rise with resilience, and to hold space for others along the way. We've shared laughs, tears, affirmations, and insights that were so deeply needed in this time. Today, this episode is about honoring those conversations and hopefully inspiring you to look at your own leadership journey through a more compassionate and empowered lens. Whether you're listening while taking a walk, commuting to work, or having some self-care time, I hope today's episode feels like a moment of reflection and inspiration. Let's take this moment to slow down, breathe, and let the lessons of this season really sink in. So let's start with our first episode with Judge Miriam Quinn. She opened up Season 10 with so much transparency and heart. Hearing her story growing up without many examples in her field, choosing law after a background in engineering, and navigating professional spaces where she often stood out was powerful. What stayed with me was her way of making room for possibility, even when the path wasn't always clear. That really resonated with me. It reminded me that leadership doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's just about showing up when you don't feel ready and doing it anyway. It's about believing that you're allowed to be in the room and then opening the door for somebody else. Then we spoke with Dr. Johanna Moya from Con Mi Madre. Her episode touched so many of us, especially those who are first-gen or raising first-gen daughters. Her work building bridges between mothers and daughters, guiding them through the school system, and it felt deeply rooted in cultural pride and long-term impact. I personally felt so moved by her commitment to making spaces for both generations to grow together. There's something incredibly powerful about honoring both the daughter's voice and the mother's sacrifice. Dr. Moya reminded us that education is not just about degrees. It's about identity, support, and community. That we are allowed to dream bigger and bring our familias with us. We kept that rhythm going with Mariana Denis, who helped us explore food, culture, and how deeply those things tie into our identity as Latinas. I really appreciated her message about honoring our traditional foods without shame. It felt freeing. Her episode was a gentle invitation to stop chasing perfection and to embrace nourishment in every form. I personally walked away feeling lighter. It was like reclaiming our culinary joy of the meals that raised us, of the kitchens where our abuelitas passed down love through recipes. Mariana gave us language and liberation, a reminder that health doesn't mean leaving our roots behind. Rosa Casquino's episode was one of the most emotionally powerful this season. Her story, her trauma, her healing, it reminded all of us that strength isn't about having it all together. It's about doing the work even when it's hard. Her vulnerability really took my breath away. She showed us what it looks like to reclaim your story and use it as a tool for transformation, not just survival. That conversation left many of us speechless, and for good reason. Rosa's courage in speaking truth to pain was a sacred moment for our community. It reminded me that silence can protect us temporarily, but our voice is what carries us towards freedom.
It's just a beautiful part of this process is to feel that somebody's actually listening to you, that somebody's not there judging you, that somebody's there for you. And I mean, I genuinely love and care for each and every one of the people that I support.
Xochitl Rodriguez shared something deeply vulnerable and relatable. Her story was layered and filled with loss, identity shifts, and moments of uncertainty, but also full of clarity and rebuilding. Listening to her reminded me of how many of us are walking through chaos and still finding ways to lead, to love, and to contribute. That episode reminded me to embrace these gray areas. We don't have to be done to be powerful. Xochitl's willingness to live in between the labels, to be honest about the mess, reminded us that wholeness includes every chapter, even the ones we'd rather skip. Riodeli Trevino brought us back to the power of persistence. Her path, balancing motherhood, full-time work, going back to school, was just so familiar to so many of us. It was an honest look at ambition through a Latina lens where family, dreams, and community responsibility often coexist. I was personally inspired by her dedication. She showed us what dedication really looks like in action. And I think that motivated more than a few listeners to take the next step in their own education or career path. Like Riodeli didn't just talk about hustle. She showed us how to navigate it with grace, boundaries, and a deep belief in what's possible.
But that you were able to work hard is something you can speak to, and it's a feeling that no one can take away from you because you did it. You worked for it. You earned it. Now, that doesn't take away from anyone that is having the ability to get provided in that financial help, because it's still difficult to go to school and to dedicate time and to focus on getting an education.
Then came Deneida Cornelio. She brought so much energy and vision to the conversation. We talked about music, Latin identity in mainstream spaces, and, carving out paths when they don't yet exist. What I admired was how unapologetic she was about who she is and how that fuels the work she does. She's one of those people who remind you that bringing your full self to the table isn't just okay. It's necessary. I found myself nodding throughout her episode, feeling energized by her boldness. Her story was a masterclass in authenticity and creating your own seat when the table doesn't have one for you, and using your joy as a compass.
I would tell my younger self, look, you did exactly what you wanted to do, and you're helping people along the way, which is the most important thing.
Now, Nikki Bauda's episode took us into the tech world, and it was so refreshing. Her global perspective and her love for learning were both inspiring. But what really stood out was how she talked about building pathways for others. That idea of not just surviving tough environments, but changing them for those coming after you. That's real leadership. Her story made me think about the ways we can all be expanders for others. It's not about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to go first and leave the light on for the next person.
My superpower is really in strategy. I have the ability to look at the world and make sense of all the patterns and connect the dots and come up with high growth strategies, whether it is for growing companies and businesses or for growing people.
And with Alejandra Rojas, we got personal about money. I mean, real personal. It was one of the most relatable episodes for our audience. We talked about inherited money fears, breaking cycles, and building abundance that aligns with our values. I found her wisdom and practical advice incredibly empowering. That conversation didn't feel transactional. It felt transformational. It gave us tools and the language to talk about something we're often taught to keep quiet. I know many listeners walked away with a little more confidence and clarity about, their finances. And Alejandra gave us permission to dream in numbers, to budget with joy, and to stop apologizing for wanting more. The conversation with Javi Mendez and Nancy Mangolejo from Lean Latinas reminded us that sisterhood is a strategy. These two women are lifting others as they climb and creating networks where Latinas can thrive, not just survive. Their insight around mentorship, collaboration, and professional growth really made me proud and excited. Their passion for building inclusive communities really hit home for me. When women lead together, so much becomes possible. They remind us that we are not competition. We are a community. That's our collective success is just part of this mission. Jasmine Alejandres invited us into a more spiritual space, a healing space. Her journey into ancestral wisdom and spiritual liberation, it felt like homecoming. There was something deeply grounding about this episode. It gave us permission to explore our own spiritual practices outside of systems, outside of guilt, and fully rooted in love. Jasmine's energy was magnetic. Her work is a reminder that healing isn't linear, that intuition is valid, and that our ancestors walk with us every day. Her episode was a blessing. And we closed out this season with the wonderful Marcela Arieta, who left us feeling grounded, grateful, and clear. She reminded us that rest is productive, boundaries are sacred and joy is a form of resistance. Her episode was a breath of fresh air we didn't know we needed. And what a beautiful way to close out the season. You know, Marcela embodies soft power, the kind that doesn't like shout, but shifts entire ropes. Her tools, her honesty, and her heart created a space where we could exhale, reflect, and remember that taking care of ourselves is the first revolution. You know, as I sit here, reflecting on this season, I feel nothing but gratitude. Season 10 wasn't just about showcasing incredible women. It's about holding up a mirror. Each of these stories reflected a different piece of our own journeys. The ambition, the burnout, the fear, the faith, the quiet victories, the loud reclaims. If you've been listening and you felt seen, that's not an accident. This podcast is for you. Whether you've been leading in your workspace, your household, your community, or just leading yourself through a hard chapter, I hope you felt reminded that you're not alone. You're part of something bigger, a movement, a legacy, a redefinition of leadership on our own terms. Season 10 may be over, but the stories live in every listener who carries them forward. So thank you for being part of this journey, for tuning in, sharing these episodes, and helping us grow. Season 10 was a milestone, but it's not the peak. We're just getting started. We'll be taking a short break to prepare for season 11. And trust me, what's coming is even more powerful. We're diving deeper, dreaming louder, and bringing even more voices to the forefront. The next chapter is going to be bold, intentional, and full of corazón. So until then, keep showing up, keep taking space, keep leading in your own way, keep dancing with your purpose, even when the music changes, Y como siempre, gracias for being part of this comunidad. Gracias por tu voz, tu tiempo y tu amor. Te veo, te escucho y te celebro. Hasta la próxima, amigas. Bye. Thank you for joining us in this amazing conversation today. If you need more information or resources, as always, they'll be in the description below. Please don't forget to follow us everywhere at Latina Leadership Podcast to stay updated with our latest releases, events, and more. We'll see you next time.